The Collector finally confronts Baylos after Baylos betrayed him. The situation crackles with tension and intensity, and then the Collector just kills him. On a whim, without a second thought, as though it were nothing more morally complicated than playing a little game, because that is all it is to the Collector, all a game. But is Baylos really dead? It's a complicated question, and perhaps the answer is yes and no, considering whether you consider that little speck of slime that attached to Hunter as he went through the portal, the real Baylos, whether that can actually be considered a living manifestation of Baylos. It probably has some bit of Baylos in it, but the extent to which that counts as Baylos is controversial. As importantly, I am glad that the ideas I've been talking about in my last couple videos about how the Collector, despite genuinely being lonely and wanting someone to play with, is not this sweet little innocent kid, have been proven correct. The Collector is as dangerous as Baylos, if not more so, even despite his lack of obvious malice. He has all the pompous, histrionic, performative tantrums of a 6-year-old, and all the same selfishness and myopia combined with profound godlike power. That is not an auspicious combination. And it certainly seems like the Collector is going to be as difficult a villain to triumph over as Baylos was as we head into the last 3 episodes of the show, which will air as part of a season 3, probably later in the year. If the Collector is self-absorbed, just consumed by his own whims and caprices, Baylos is consumed by his dedication to very fundamentalist and stone-like, absolutely unchanging moral conviction that witches are polluted, vile creatures that need to be eliminated. And his inability to shift from that worldview causes his downfall. He could have perhaps been a friend to Luce. He could have been a guide to her and helped her out. But instead, he has long been so fundamentally committed to destroying all forms of magic life on this world under the auspices of only ending wild magic that he cannot look back. He cannot even reconsider what he did to his brother, who we get a hint in this episode was indeed called Caleb, just like the name Hunter uses during his infiltration of Hexside a couple episodes back. He has dedicated himself mind, body, and soul to the fulfillment of this ideal, to returning home as a victor and a conqueror of witches after destroying their entire kind. And if this is the last we see of Baylos, I'm not sure what to think about that. His story is interesting and almost tragic in a way. His purity of his devotions blinding him to the vibrant, beautiful reality around him, or even the ability to make new, genuine connections with others. And his life just ends. Brutally, abruptly, and hauntingly. And it ends in stages, we see. Luce, first with him abandoning his human form and transforming into this wild-eyed, demented monster of destruction and devastation, and finally with the Collector's capricious, blithe slap against the wall. I do wish we could have seen more of Baylos, and I wish we could have seen more of him interacting with Luce. This episode confirms my suspicions that there is a lot for these two to talk about. There is a lot of material that would fuel discussions between them, and moral and philosophical debates, and just these weird, fragmented parallels between the two of them. Because Baylos sees these parallels. Luce is obviously not like him in a lot of ways. She is a teenage, progressive, modern-day Latina. But she is like him in that she knows what it's like to live between these two worlds and kind of not really have a clear sense of self, a clear sense of identity. He doesn't do anything as simple and overt as saying, oh, we're really the same, but he does try to bond with her to a certain extent over how they're both humans trapped in this hostile world. Which is, of course, not an argument Luce is particularly receptive to, but it does demonstrate that Baylos sees Luce differently, even now, than he sees all the other witches in this world, which he views as monstrous creatures deserving of being eliminated. Now, one could argue that Baylos is just trying to manipulate Luce, which is true to a certain extent. He's always trying to manipulate people, and perhaps no words he says can really be trusted. But a lot of what he says does in fact seem honest. It does come from a real emotional place and a real philosophical and moral place, even if it's one we vehemently disagree with. He offers to transport Luce home, and he even seems okay with her being his guide to the human world, in demonstrating how much it has changed in the last 400 years. All of this really makes me wish that we had gotten more scenes between the two of them. Yes, we did get those interactions between Luce and the inner Baylos in Hollow Mind, and those were terrifying and phantasmagorical and so full of eerie, disconcerting wonder and devastation and mystery. But the inner Baylos is also not Baylos. That might seem like a silly distinction to make, but it is one we should remember. Remember understanding Willow, in which there is a difference between the inner Willow and the Willow we know. The inner Willow, or the inner Baylos, is just pure emotion, pure, unrestrained desire and fury and uncertainty. It's where all one's rage and passion and yearning just boils up, unrestrained by decorum. It's one's pure id in Freudian terms. And it's a dark reflection of the self. Now that this was the inner Baylos does not make his feral and unhinged and morally degraded behavior any more comfortable to witness, but it does mean that the only real hero versus villain, palpable, visceral interaction we get is at the end of Season 1, and a lot has changed since then. I would have loved to see a few episodes wherein Luce is Baylos' unwilling human guide to this modern world, and Baylos, stern, stoic, austere, unintentionally makes himself look hilarious by not knowing how to fit into everyday human society and by spouting his vehement anti-witch rhetoric. I'm sure few people would come to his side, especially if he brought proof of the existence of this other world. But for the most part, it's not just his belief in witches that's absurd to a modern-day audience, but his entire moral and philosophical worldview. We live in a industrial, globalized society now that is entirely alien to what the world was like back 400 years ago when Phillip's from. And there are a lot of unfortunate things about this chaotic rush of modern-day society, but it at least is more tolerant than the fundamentalist Puritan ethic that Baylos represents. In spite of myself, I feel a little sorry for him, especially when I see him so proudly and ostentatiously putting on his best human clothing to appear like a noble gentleman when he returns to Earth. He has sacrificed the chance to learn and grow from his experiences in the Boiling Isles, instead retreating into resentment and bitterness, clinging to the ethics and morals and mores and viewpoints instilled in him by a world that has long ago passed away. He would probably react negatively and be a bit disconcerted and even, dare I say it, a bit lonely. As different as Luce is to him, he would probably take even more of an interest in her as the only other human who knows something similar to what he knows after everything he would endure in the human world, being confronted with this entirely separate world, this entirely separate plane of existence. Instead, he devolves into a raving monster who knows only rage and destruction. This pure, gooey palisman being that is his punishment for trying to keep his life force around for that long. And now Baylos is gone, and we have to face the consequences of him no longer being our main villain, that role now being filled by the Collector. I'm not saying our group made the wrong choice to free the Collector. They didn't really have a real choice, considering that Baylos was going to kill everyone. But now the role of main villain's not held by this dour, austere fundamentalist, acting from a sense of extreme moral conviction, but rather this anarchic, capricious little kid who's willing to cause all manner of chaos just so he can play a game. I'm not sure that's an improvement. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos just like this one. What do you think about what happened to Baylos? What role do you think he'll play in Season 3? In his final degradation into that monstrous form, I'm reminded a little of what happens to Ganondorf as he turns into Ganon in Ocarina of Time. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon, promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.